Hey, hello and welcome. In this video today, we're going to talk about a very important question for therapy. And this is a question I get asked a lot, both offline and online. And the question is it okay in a emotional-based therapy for a therapist to cry during a client session? Now, I'm very direct on this. I have very, very strong beliefs around this area. I used to actually train people to be therapists or coaches, but I don't really do that anymore. But just to give you a little bit more about my background, I was a personal trainer for 15 years, and I've been a professional trauma therapist since 2008, doing keynote talks, online and offline training, and obviously one-to-one therapy. So back to the question, is it okay for a therapist to cry during a client session? I'm going to be very direct about this, and the answer is a definite no. It is not okay, and I'm going to explain why that is, and if you are in a session with a therapist and they do cry, the risks that that could mean to your future unfoldment or re-regulation or overcoming your own trauma. So this, by the way, that I'm talking about there when I say a definite no, it is about, can that person help the client move forward? And if a therapist becomes over emotional, cries or gets really angry or triggers in some way, then they are what I would class as a person calling themselves a therapist rather than actually being a therapist. Because what we've got to look at in the whole therapeutic intervention is about energy management and effectiveness. Now, as humans, we obviously all have emotions, and it comes down to capacity of being able to re-regulate our own emotions through experiences that we have or have not had. Now, if you imagine it here as a scale of 1 to 10, once a person reaches a capacity level of 7, their emotions start to show themselves more and more. Now, if a person is going to cry, that means their emotional capacity is way over number 7. They cannot control their emotions anymore, and they come spewing out. So why is this a risk to a client in a therapy session? Well, what it means is that if a person who's calling themselves a therapist is getting upset, overwhelmed, triggered in some way, or even cries, that means that whatever you or the client has been sharing is overwhelming the person calling themselves a therapist. It's took them too far beyond their own capabilities. Now, why that is a big red flag is because once a person gets overwhelmed, their cognitive ability and capability drastically reduces, meaning that that person will become solely focused on their own emotions rather than being there for the client. So let's just step back and look at the situation as it could unfold. A client is in a session and they are sharing what is on their mind. It could be past trauma, it could be something they're going through now, it could be something that they've experienced that was devastating in some way, a whole host of abuse that may have been projected onto them when they were younger. And then they start to share that with the person calling themselves a therapist. Now, what happens is that that person calling themselves the therapist will be listening to what the client is sharing. And then, if that person calling themselves the therapist cannot cope with what is being shared to them, and what will happen when that information from the client is being shared is it's kind of filling up that tank of the emotional overwhelm of the person calling themselves a therapist. So what's happening is they're going to 5 to 6 to 7, and then it comes spewing out. The content or information in these videos is for educational, informational purposes only. It is your responsibility what you do with this information. So when the client is sharing their information, what happens is the attention of the person calling themselves a therapist switches from being there for the client to being there for themselves, meaning that none of the attention and focus of the therapist is on the client. It's on the therapist. And given that a client goes to see a therapist to be focused on and to be guided through their own trauma, If the therapist is focused on themselves and their own emotional overwhelm, then they are not being there for the client, meaning that the client is sat there trying to resolve their own trauma, their own overwhelm, and get from A to B, and having paid for that session financially as well, to a person who is not capable of helping guide them from A to B. Why? Because they're solely consumed with their own emotional overwhelm. Now, I'm very vocal about this. There are lots of people out there claiming that they are coaches, trainers, and therapists who have not overcome their own emotional trauma from their past. They've got some quick fix qualification. They may have gone through a few sessions, but they have not overcome their own trauma, meaning that it's kind of like a glass ceiling. So if they've overcome, say, 60% of their trauma, that means they have not found the way out of their own situation. And given that a client is relying on the support of the therapist to get there, but as well, this causes a whole cascade for the client, because very often people may go to a therapy session and then feel really guilty that they, quote, made the therapist cry. And really what should be happening if you have been in that situation as the client, I know I definitely have, I've had this happen to me as well. When I was going through therapy, we want to be supported. We want to be listened to. We want that space to just share our thoughts without feeling self-conscious. And if you start to share and express what you're feeling, whether that may be anger or sadness or some horrific abuse that you experienced, it's absolutely essential that you do that in a safe environment, without judgment, without the other person feeling overwhelmed, and for them to remain calm and focused and guide you through. So I hope this video has helped shed a bit of light on the question of, is it okay for a therapist to cry in session? There are amazing therapists, coaches, and trainers out there. But for me, I'm very vocal about it, that a therapist crying in a session, in my opinion, is not a therapist at all. They're a person who's saying that they are a therapist, but is not putting the time, effort, and dedication in to work on their own trauma projections, and are unfortunately using other people and their financial resources to work through their own trauma by posing as a therapist, but actually manipulating the situation for their own trauma recovery, which once again is very unprofessional. So I hope this video helps. Any questions that you've got, or any feedback or thoughts you may have had from experiences that you've had in therapy sessions before, I hope this hasn't happened to you, but if it has, feel free to put them in the comments below, because you never know, something you might share could stop another person going through a loop or a holding pattern for weeks, months, or even years, sometimes costing them thousands in finance. So any thoughts or feedback, feel free to put them in the comments below, because I always say, you never know, your comment could change somebody's life for the better for the rest of their life.